She put her arm across the doorway like I was nobody. Not a hand on my shoulder, not a quiet word in my ear, an arm, flat, across the entrance of the funeral home, like a crossing guard stopping traffic, and she looked me dead in the eyes when she did it. "You're not family," Rhonda said. "You never were. This isn't your grief to have." I was holding white lilies, Gerald's favorite. I had driven 40 minutes to find that specific flower because the first two grocery stores were out of them. I was wearing the black dress he had once said looked elegant. I had taken the morning off work. I had cried in my bathroom at 6 in the morning trying to do my mascara. I had cried again in the car at a red light, and I had pulled myself together anyway, because that is what I always did. And now I was standing on a sidewalk in November, holding flowers for a man I genuinely loved, while his daughter blocked the door with her arm, and her cousins stood on either side of her like they were guarding something that belonged to them. The doors closed. I didn't know it then, but Gerald had already made sure I'd be the last one standing. "My name is Celeste. I'm 34 years old. I work as a licensed occupational therapist at a mid-size rehabilitation clinic about 20 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio. My job is not glamorous. I don't get recognized anywhere. I help stroke patients relearn how to hold a fork. I help elderly men and women stand up from chairs without falling. I spend a lot of my days in rooms that smell like antiseptic and cafeteria food, talking people through exercises they hate, cheering for milestones that most of the world would consider too small to celebrate. I'm good at it, and I've always been the kind of person who shows up, does the work, and doesn't make a lot of noise about it. I met Derek at a friend's backyard party when I was 27. He was charming and warm and laughed at everything I said. We dated for 2 years and got married on a Saturday in June. It was a small wedding. His family came and smiled in all the photos, and I thought that meant something. I thought we were off to a good start. I was wrong about that, but it took me a while to see it clearly. His mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who communicated through implication. She never said anything outright cruel to me. She just asked questions. "Celeste, are you thinking about going back to school?" When I already had a master's degree. "Celeste, is that what you're wearing?" Before Derek's cousin's engagement party. Small things, delivered with a pleasant smile. I spent years second-guessing myself after those conversations without fully understanding why. Rhonda was more direct. Not to my face usually, but I could feel it. She had a way of organizing family events that consistently left me slightly outside of things. The group chat I wasn't added to until 3 years in, and only because Derek noticed. The Christmas gift exchanges where everyone had a name except me. The way she'd tell a childhood story at dinner and say "the family" when she meant everyone except me. I told myself it was growing pains. I told myself it would get better. Gerald was the reason I kept trying. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with big hands that looked like they'd done hard work for decades, and they had. He'd built a small electrical contracting business from nothing in the 1980s, sold it before he retired, and spent his later years puttering around his property, reading history books, and feeding birds off his back porch. He didn't say much, but when he did, it meant something. The first time I felt like I mattered to that family was because of him. We were at their house for Thanksgiving. I was in the kitchen with Patricia, who was telling me again with that pleasant smile that her friend's daughter-in-law was a pediatric surgeon. I was nodding and trying to look interested when Gerald came in through the back door, stomped his boots on the mat, and said, "Celeste, you want to come see the garden before it gets dark?" Just like that. No setup, he just pulled me out of that kitchen and walked me around his half-dead November garden for 20 minutes, pointing at things, talking about what he was going to plant in spring. I don't think he knew what he was rescuing me from, or maybe he did. After that, whenever I was at their house and things started to feel claustrophobic, Gerald would find some reason to include me. A question about my patients, a request for help with something in the garage. He once spent an entire hour asking me about the neuroscience of stroke recovery because he'd read something about it and wanted to understand. He listened the whole time. He asked follow-up questions. "The realest person in this family is you, Celeste," he told me once, about 4 years into my marriage. We were standing by his truck in the driveway after a Sunday dinner. He said it simply, like it was just a fact he was stating. I laughed and said he was being kind. He shook his head. "I'm being accurate." Pause. I should have taken that more seriously. Gerald had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 71. It was sudden. Derek got the call while we were eating breakfast. I watched his face go white. I drove us both to the hospital because his hands were shaking too badly to grip the wheel. Gerald was gone before we got there. I cried at the hospital. I cried on the drive home. I cried in the shower that night, and again the next morning, and in small, quiet bursts for days. I had lost someone who had made me feel like I belonged somewhere I was never fully welcome. That kind of grief sits differently. It's grief mixed with something lonelier. And almost before I had time to breathe, the erasing started. The morning of the funeral, I was in the bathroom at 7 in the morning trying to get my eyeliner straight when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a group text from Rhonda. It had gone to what looked like 12 or 13 people, all family members. She had accidentally included me. The message said, "Reminder, family cars leave at 10 sharp. Also, she's not on the list. She can find her own way." I set the phone down on the counter face up and stared at it for a moment. Then I picked up my eyeliner and kept going. I didn't respond. I didn't forward it to Derek. I just put the phone in my purse, finished getting ready, and drove myself to the funeral home. I got there at 9:45. The parking lot was already filling up. I recognized people from Gerald's church, his old business contacts, neighbors who had known him for 30 years. I had met most of them at various family events. A few of them waved at me as I walked up. I waved back and kept moving toward the entrance. Rhonda was already there. She was standing just inside the doorway with 2 of her cousins, and when she saw me coming up the top step, her posture shifted. She straightened, and when I got to the top step, she put her arm across the entrance. The cousins moved slightly to fill the space around her. "This is a private family service," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "You're not family. You can pay your respects at the burial, maybe." People were watching. I could feel it without looking. That particular quality of silence where everyone around you has gone still. I looked past Rhonda into the lobby. Derek was standing about 15 feet inside, near a floral arrangement. He was looking directly at me. I held his gaze for a moment, waiting for him to move, to say something, to walk over. He looked down to his shoes. That moment lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt longer. I didn't beg, I didn't argue. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with Rhonda in front of an audience was exactly what she wanted. It would become the story. Celeste caused a scene at the funeral. So I stepped back from the doorway without a word. A funeral director appeared at my elbow, a quiet man with silver hair and a measured voice. He said, "Ma'am, would you like to wait inside? There's a seating area in the lobby." He said it gently, the way people speak to someone when they understand what has just happened without needing it explained. I said yes. I followed him inside and sat in a chair near a small table with a box of tissues and a vase of carnations. The lobby had a particular smell, that specific mix of carpet cleaner and fresh flowers that exists only in funeral homes, the kind of smell that stays with you. Rhonda didn't look at me as she moved past to take her place in the main room. I sat in that chair for an hour and 15 minutes. I could hear the organ music coming through the closed doors, low and slow. I could hear the pastor's voice occasionally, rising and falling, though I couldn't make out the words. At one point, I heard what was clearly a large group of people laughing softly at something, maybe a memory someone shared, and I gripped the flowers in my lap and stared at the wall. Gerald's old colleague Raymond, a man in his late 60s who had come to our wedding, walked past me on his way out of the restroom. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at the closed doors and then back at me, and his face did something complicated. "Celeste," he said. "Hi, Raymond." He opened his mouth and closed it again. Then he patted my hand once and walked away. He didn't have the words. That was okay. Neither did I. The burial was at a cemetery about 3 miles from the funeral home. I drove there separately and stood near the back of the gathering. The ground was cold, and the sky was flat and gray, the kind of November afternoon that feels like it was designed specifically for grief. A few people nodded at me. Patricia, Derek's mother, looked through me like I was made of glass. Afterward, the family went to the house for the reception. No one had given me the updated address. I found that out later. The location had been changed the night before to a family member's home across town. The update had gone out in the group chat I had seen exactly one message from. I drove to the original address out of habit, the house where Derek had grown up, where I had spent 6 Christmases and 4 Thanksgivings and more Sunday dinners than I could count. I pulled up and the driveway was empty. The lights were off. A garbage can at the curb had been knocked sideways by the wind, and no one had come out to fix it. I sat in the car with the engine running for a while. Then my phone buzzed. Derek. I opened the message with the specific hopefulness of someone who knows they're probably about to be disappointed, but can't help hoping anyway. Maybe give us some space today. 6 words. After everything. 6 words. I put the phone in the cup holder. I watched a man walk his dog down the sidewalk. The dog stopped to sniff a mailbox. The man waited patiently. The streetlights started flickering on even though it wasn't fully dark yet. I drove home. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and ate cereal for dinner because I hadn't thought about groceries in a week. The apartment was very quiet. Derek had texted again, something about staying at his mom's for a few days to help with things. I responded, okay, because I didn't know what else to say. Around midnight, my phone lit up. Derek. Not a text, a call. I stared at it through 2 full rings before I answered. He sounded like he'd been crying, or close to it. His voice had that thick, careful quality people get when they're trying to hold themselves together over the phone. Celeste, I'm sorry about today, at the door. I should have said something. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to, he said. I just didn't know how to go against all of them at once. You know how my mom gets. And Rhonda had already talked to everyone, and I just... He stopped. I froze. I know that's not good enough. I sat with that for a moment. Part of me wanted to tell him it was okay, that I understood, that grief makes people do things they regret. Derek, I said finally, you watched her put her arm across the door. You watched her turn me away in front of his colleagues and his neighbors and people who have known me for 6 years, and you looked at your shoes. Silence. I know, he said quietly. I don't think you froze. I think you made a choice, and I think somewhere you knew it was the wrong one, and you made it anyway. He didn't argue. That was almost worse than if he had. Get some sleep, I said, and I hung up. I sat at the table for a long time after that, not angry, something quieter than angry. The kind of clarity that comes when you've been looking at something from the wrong angle for years, and suddenly the light shifts. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the Tuesday morning when everything changed, and then I thought about something else. About 14 months before he died, Gerald called me on a regular Wednesday afternoon while I was between patients. He said he needed a small favor. Could he give me my full legal name, first, middle, last? He said it was for a form, a formality. I gave it to him and didn't think about it again. Until now. The next morning, Rhonda posted a photo on Facebook. It was a group shot from the reception, maybe 30 people around a long table. Everyone was smiling. The caption said, "Surrounded by the people Gerald truly loved. Thank you for holding us up today." My phone buzzed for the next 2 hours, friends texting to ask if Derek and I had split up. One friend sent me a screenshot of the post with no message, just a question mark. I stared at that question mark for a long time. Rhonda messaged me privately that afternoon. No preamble, just, "Don't make this about you. He was our father." I read it. I set the phone down. I went back to work. 2 days later, Derek came home. He had a bag of his things and a carefully neutral expression I had learned to read over 6 years of marriage. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and folded his hands in front of him and started talking. He said, "My mom thinks it would be better if you stepped back from family events for a while, just until things settle. Everyone's still processing, and it might be less stressful all around if—" He kept going. I stopped hearing the specific words. I was watching his hands, folded neatly on the table. You could tell by the rhythm of it, the careful pauses, the way he didn't quite make eye contact, but didn't quite look away either. Someone had written this speech, and he practiced it. I thought about the phone call 2 nights before. I know that's not good enough. And then he had shown up to deliver this speech anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about the gap between what Derek felt and what Derek was willing to do about it. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay?" "Okay, Derek, I heard you." He looked like he didn't know what to do with that. He had come prepared for pushback or tears or an argument. He got none of those things. I stood up, picked up my work bag, and went to bed. That night, I took the white envelope out of my bag. I held it in both hands, Gerald's handwriting on the front, just my name, Celeste. He had always had neat, deliberate handwriting, the kind you'd expect from someone who learned it before everything went digital. I didn't open it. I set it on my nightstand. And I lay in the dark and thought about the phone call from 14 months ago, my full legal name, for a form. What form? The day after Derek's kitchen table speech, I came back from lunch to find a voicemail I almost didn't listen to. I was eating a sandwich in the clinic parking lot, scrolling through emails, when I noticed the notification. Unknown number, local area code. I hit play mostly out of habit. "Mrs. Celeste, my name is Edmund Aldridge. I'm an estate attorney. I was Gerald's personal attorney for the last 19 years. I'd like to speak with you directly, at your convenience. Please call me back." His voice was measured and professional and calm, the voice of someone who chose every word deliberately. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after the message ended. I called him back from my car before I went back inside. He was careful. He said there was a formal will reading scheduled. He said my presence was legally required. He said he couldn't share more than that over the phone. But there was something in the way he said, "Your presence is legally required," that made my heart do something strange in my chest. Like a door opening. I remembered what Gerald had told me once, 2 years into my marriage. Most of the family was in the living room watching football. The 2 of us had ended up in the kitchen doing dishes without quite meaning to. He handed me a plate and said without looking up from the sink, "The people who show up quietly are the ones I trust." I had nodded and kept drying dishes and filed it away as one of Gerald's occasional plain-spoken wisdoms.
Now, I was understanding it differently.
Mr. Aldridge agreed to meet me at my clinic during a lunch break, 4 days before the reading. He was in his late 60s, slim, with close-cut gray hair, and the kind of unhurried manner that takes decades to develop. He came in wearing a dark coat and sat across from me in the small break room off the main hallway. He folded his hands on the table in a way that reminded me, just slightly, of Gerald. "I want to be clear about what I can and can't tell you today," he said. "There are things I'm not at liberty to discuss before the formal reading, but I want you to know that you need to be in that room. That is not a formality. That is the most important thing I can tell you." I asked him if there was something I should be concerned about. "The family has retained a separate attorney," he said. "They're trying to establish that you have no legal standing in the estate. They've been moving quickly." He paused. "They won't find what they're looking for." Gerald was very specific, very thorough. He had that document prepared and notarized 14 months ago, and it is airtight. 14 months ago. Around the time he called me and asked for my full legal name. I kept my face very still. I said, "I understand." "There's one more thing," Aldridge said. He looked at me directly. "If anyone presents you with any document to sign between now and the reading, you don't sign it. Not anything. Call me first." I said I would. 3 days later, Derek came home with a document. He slid it across the kitchen table toward me in a manila folder. He explained, with a casual sort of confidence, that it was something the family's attorney had drawn up, a grief support and estate simplification form, completely routine. It would just help things move more smoothly. He said it like that, move more smoothly, the way someone says something they've been told to say. I opened the folder. The document was 3 pages of dense legal language. I read the first paragraph and the last paragraph. Then I said I needed a few minutes to look it over. I went to the bedroom and closed the door and called Aldridge. He picked up on the second ring. I described what I was looking at. His response was immediate. "Do not sign it. Put it back in the folder. Tell him you need more time. Do not sign a single word." I went back to the kitchen. I closed the folder. I told Derek I needed more time to read it. He got that particular look he had, the one where his jaw tightened slightly and his eyes went somewhere else. He said, "Okay." He went to the living room. That night, I lay awake and listened to him on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, but I could hear the shape of it. He was talking to Rhonda. I could tell by the rhythm, the pauses where she was talking, the way his voice got tighter and quieter. They thought they had won. That was the thing. They had pushed me out of the funeral, out of the reception, out of the family, and now they were pushing me to sign something that would erase whatever Gerald had left me. They had been so systematic about it, so efficient, that they had made themselves sloppy. Because people who believe they've already won stop watching for the thing they missed. They had never watched me that carefully to begin with. The will reading was on a Thursday. Aldridge's office was in a mid-rise building downtown, the kind with a lobby that smells like recycled air and carpet cleaner. His conference room was on the 7th floor, long and narrow, with a dark wood table and chairs upholstered in something that might have been leather 20 years ago. A window looked out at a gray November sky. I arrived 5 minutes early and signed in with the receptionist. She offered me coffee. I took it because my hands were cold. When I walked into the conference room, Rhonda was already there. So was Derek, Patricia, Gerald's son from his first marriage, whose name was Thomas, and their respective spouses. 8 people total, plus Aldridge at the head of the table. When I came through the door, the temperature in the room changed. I could feel it. Rhonda's chin lifted slightly. She looked at Aldridge like she was waiting for him to inform me I was in the wrong place. He glanced at me, nodded once, and gestured to an open seat. I sat down. I put my bag on the floor. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Rhonda leaned toward me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. She said, quietly but clearly, "You have no reason to be here, Celeste." I looked at her. I didn't say anything. I turned back toward the front of the room and waited. Aldridge cleared his throat and began. The first several minutes were standard. He explained the process, he confirmed everyone's identification, he read the opening language of the will, the formal declarations, Gerald's full name and the date of execution. His voice was level and practiced. The room was very quiet. Patricia had a tissue in her hand. Thomas was looking at the table. Then Aldridge began the specific bequests. To Thomas, Gerald's first son, a sum of money and a specific set of woodworking tools that had belonged to Gerald's father. To Rhonda, the family china and a cash sum. To Derek, Gerald's watch collection and another cash amount. Small additional bequests to grandchildren, a charitable donation to the church, a specific request about his truck. Rhonda had relaxed. I could see it in her shoulders, the way they had dropped down from her ears. She glanced at me once with an expression I knew how to read. She thought we had arrived at the end. We hadn't arrived at anything yet. Aldridge turned a page. His voice didn't get louder, it just got more deliberate, slower, each word placed carefully. To my daughter-in-law, Celeste, the only person in this family who never needed anything from me and gave anyway. He paused there, just for a beat. I leave the full title to the lake house property and 60% of the liquid estate. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then it broke all at once. Rhonda's chair scraped back hard against the floor. Patricia pressed her tissue to her mouth. Derek sat up sharply. Derek's coffee cup came down on the table louder than he meant it to. "Stop." Rhonda's voice was flat and hard. "Stop reading. There's been a mistake." Aldridge did not look up. "This is not legal," she said, louder now. "She was always over there, always making herself useful, always positioning herself. You don't see what she was doing?" She turned to the room, not just to Aldridge, but to everyone, like she was looking for allies. Dad was lonely. She took advantage of that. This is textbook undue influence, and I want it on record that we are contesting this right now, today, before we leave this room. "Rhonda?" Thomas said her name quietly, a warning. She didn't hear it, or didn't care. Aldridge set the page down. He reached into the folder and produced a separate document. He placed it on the table without drama and let it sit there. "The will was executed 14 months ago," he said. "Gerald was in excellent health at the time. He requested a full competency evaluation himself, which I have documented in this packet. The document was notarized by 2 independent witnesses with no connection to any party in this room." He looked at Rhonda steadily. "There is no legal basis for a challenge on grounds of undue influence." "Then we'll find another basis," Rhonda said. "That is your right," Aldridge said simply. He picked the page back up. Patricia made a sound, a short, sharp exhale. She pressed her tissue harder against her mouth. Derek was very still. He was staring at the table in front of him, not at me, not at Rhonda, just at the grain of the wood, like he was trying to find something in it. "There is also a personal letter," Aldridge said. "Gerald asked that it be read aloud." Rhonda said, "I don't think that's—" "It is a legally incorporated component of the will. It will be read." He unfolded a second piece of paper. "I have watched this family for a long time," Aldridge read. "I have watched how people behave when they think it doesn't count. I have watched who shows up and who disappears. I have watched who listens and who performs. I watched my daughter-in-law, Celeste, show up year after year to a table that never fully set a place for her. I watched her be kind to people who were not kind in return. I watched her love my son, even when my son was not watching.
I will not leave this earth without making sure that someone told her clearly, I saw you. You were never invisible in my eyes. I hope this helps you believe that. Aldridge folded the letter and set it down. The room was quiet in a different way than before. Patricia was crying, not dabbing, crying. Thomas had his hand over his mouth. Even Brent, one of the cousins who had stood guard at the funeral home door, was looking at the table with an expression I couldn't quite name. Rhonda said, "This is not over," but her voice had lost something. The edge was still there, but the certainty behind it had gone soft. Derek finally looked up, not at Aldridge, soft at me. His eyes were red at the corners. He looked like someone who had just understood something too late to do anything about it, and knew it.
I stood up. I picked up my bag. I pushed in my chair. I looked at Rhonda, who was gripping the edge of the table, her face flushed, her jaw working like she was searching for the next thing to say. "He saw me," I said. I didn't have to fight for it. I just had to keep showing up. Then I walked out. Aldridge caught up with me in the hallway. He put a hand briefly on my arm and said, "My office is at the end of the corridor. Let's go take care of the paperwork." I followed him. Behind me, through the closed conference room door, I could hear raised voices. I didn't stop walking. I didn't go home that night. I drove to the lake house. It's about an hour east of the city, off a county road that winds through farmland before it gets to the water. I had been there maybe 4 times in 6 years, always as part of a larger family gathering, always on the edges of someone else's weekend. I pulled up in the dark and sat in the car for a minute before I got out. The house was a modest 2-story winder with a wide covered porch facing the water. Cold out, maybe 38 degrees, the kind of cold that gets into your jacket. I didn't have a key yet, but Aldridge had given me the lockbox code. I punched it in. The key was where he said it would be. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It smelled like wood smoke and dust, and the particular stillness of a house that hasn't been opened in weeks. Gerald's fishing boots were by the back door, a coffee mug on the counter with a ring stain inside it, a stack of history books on the side table next to the couch, a bookmark still wedged into the one on top. I stood there for a moment and just looked at all of it. These were the things of a man who lived quietly and purposefully. No clutter, no excess, just the objects of someone who knew what he valued and kept those things close. I went out to the porch and sat in one of the wooden chairs Gerald had set up facing the water. The lake at night is a particular kind of quiet. The water moves, but it doesn't make much noise. Just a low, slow sound against the dock. Steady, rhythmic, like breathing. Derek had called 6 times on the drive over. I let every one go to voicemail. I sat on that porch for a long time. The cold didn't bother me much. I had my coat, and I had the quiet, and I had the sound of the water. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, I didn't feel like I needed to be anywhere else or be anything other than exactly what I was. I thought about Gerald. The garden walk on Thanksgiving, the dishes after Sunday dinner, the driveway conversation where he told me I was the realest person in the family and meant every word of it. I thought about all the small moments he had created specifically to make sure I knew I was seen. And I thought about the fact that he had been doing that for years, quietly, consistently, without making a production of it. He was showing me the whole time exactly who he was. I just hadn't understood the full size of it until now. Inside my bag was the white envelope. I had been carrying it since the funeral, every day in my work bag, every night on my nightstand. I had held it a dozen times without opening. The family filed a legal challenge within 10 days. It was dismissed in less than 2 weeks. Aldridge had made certain there were no cracks. The competency documentation, the notarized date, the independent witnesses, there was nothing to hold on to. Rhonda's attorney apparently advised her to sell the matter and move forward. Her social media posts about protecting Gerald's legacy disappeared one by one over the following week. The Facebook tributes, the vague commentary about outsiders, gone. Quietly, the way things disappear when they stop being useful. I took a week off work. I sat on that porch every morning with coffee and watched the sun come up over the water. The light hits the lake in the early morning at an angle that turns everything gold for about 10 minutes before it levels out into regular daylight. Gerald had probably watched that happen hundreds of times. I was starting to understand why he loved it here. There was a rhythm to those mornings that I hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. Wake up before the sun, make coffee in Gerald's kitchen using his old percolator because I couldn't find a regular coffee maker anywhere, carry the mug out to the porch, sit in the same chair, watch the light change over the water, listen to the birds start up slowly, one at a time, until the whole tree line was awake. It was the quietest week of my adult life, and it was exactly what I needed. By the end of that week, I called my attorney. Not Aldridge, my own attorney, a woman I had met through a colleague 2 years earlier. I told her I needed to start the divorce process. She asked if I was sure. Yes, I said. Okay, she said. Let's get started. The paperwork was filed quietly on a Friday afternoon. No announcement, no conversation about it. Derek found out through his attorney the following Monday. He called me 3 times that day. I let the calls go to voicemail. On the third one, he left a message. I listened to it once. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known what to do. He said the family had put pressure on him and he hadn't handled it right. All of that was probably true. It didn't change anything. Because being right about why you failed someone doesn't change what it felt like to be failed. And I had been failed. In a doorway, in front of people who knew my name, by the one person in that family who was supposed to stand beside me. He had looked at his shoes. I made my decision. The last thing I thought about before I closed that chapter completely was the doorway of the funeral home. Rhonda's arms stretched across the entrance, the cousins filling the space around her, the white lilies in my hands, the black dress Gerald once called elegant, the doors closing in my face while I stood on a November sidewalk and held flowers for a man I genuinely loved. "You're not family," she had said. Gerald had answered that. He had answered it 14 months before he died, in a notary's office on an ordinary afternoon, in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a man who had already decided who deserved to be certain. I was family. I had always been family. He just made sure I'd be the last one standing. He just made sure I was the one who walked away with everything. Tell me, have you ever been the one they tried to erase?